My ex-wife came to court pregnant, expecting a massive payout. What she didn't know was that as a forensic accountant, I'd meticulously exposed her lies for months. I had irrefutable evidence of her fabricated claim and true partner. The judge's cold gaze, the public humiliation, and the perjury charge shattered her world. She lost everything, while I finally walked free. My ex-wife, Jessica, had a flair for the dramatic, but even I wasn't entirely prepared for the sheer audacity of her grand entrance at our final divorce hearing. The courtroom, usually a bastion of solemn procedure, seemed to hold its collective breath as she waddled in, a pronounced baby bump stretching the fabric of her impeccably tailored designer dress. A small, self-satisfied smirk played on her lips, a silent declaration of impending victory, as if this obvious charade would definitively secure her a hefty financial payout. She clearly believed this performance would sway the stern judge, transforming her into a vulnerable, abandoned woman deserving of my financial ruin. It was a cheap, transparent soap opera plot, meticulously staged for maximum emotional impact, and for a fleeting moment, a cynical laugh almost escaped me. Not because I harbored even a sliver of doubt that the child was mine. I knew with absolute, forensic certainty it wasn't, but because I could see the entire, intricate, yet utterly transparent plan unfolding in her eyes, a blueprint for blackmail etched in her calculating gaze. This wasn't just about money. It was about public humiliation, about stripping me of every last shred of dignity she thought I possessed, a final, spiteful act of control. I'm Mark, a forensic accountant by trade. My professional life revolves around dissecting financial lies, tracing illicit money trails, and meticulously uncovering hidden assets for corporations and legal firms. It's a profession that demands an almost obsessive attention to detail, a preternatural knack for recognizing patterns of deception, and an unwavering, almost clinical commitment to objective truth. These skills, honed over 2 decades of exposing complex corporate fraud and embezzlement schemes, had unexpectedly become my most potent weapons in my personal life. Jessica, however, had always fatally underestimated me, consistently mistaking my quiet nature for weakness, my methodical patience for passive resignation. She genuinely believed I'd panic under pressure, get flustered by her theatrics, perhaps even offer a cripplingly generous settlement just to avoid looking like the heartless villain in front of the judge and the gallery. But she didn't possess the critical information I did. She didn't know the full extent of my preparations, the meticulous depth of my resolve. I had already dissected her financial history, her spending habits, and her patterns of deceit, just like I would any complex financial fraud case, months ago. The undeniable truth about Jessica was, she wasn't just spectacularly bad at marriage. She was utterly inept at lying, and every calculated, self-serving move she made only served to confirm my darkest suspicions, and more importantly, fuel my strategic, methodical counterattack. Our divorce process had been a grueling, 2-year ordeal, a testament to Jessica's inherent penchant for chaos and drama. It was a relentless cascade of legal delays, theatrical tantrums both in and out of court, and a continuous stream of frivolous filings designed solely to drain my dwindling financial resources, and more effectively, my rapidly diminishing patience. If she had invested even half that relentless effort into our actual marriage, applying that same Machiavellian energy to our shared life, we might never have ended up here, in this sterile, unforgiving courtroom, preparing for the final, ignominious act of her self-immolation. I vividly recalled the unopened, still in its original box charcoal grill that had sat on our patio for 3 years, a silent, mocking monument to all her grand promises and her complete inability to follow through. It was just one of countless small, daily betrayals that over time had relentlessly eroded any lingering trust or affection I once had for her. Jessica finally settled into her seat, a hand instinctively cradling her prominently displayed baby bump, the other delicately brushing a stray strand of perfectly coiffed hair behind her ear. Her every movement was exaggerated, theatrical, a carefully rehearsed portrayal of profound exhaustion and debilitating vulnerability designed to elicit maximum sympathy. She even managed a dramatic sigh, as if the sheer, unbearable weight of her fabricated ordeal was simply too much for her fragile constitution to bear. She stole a swift, triumphant glance at me, a gleam of anticipated victory in her eyes, clearly expecting me to squirm uncomfortably under the intense public scrutiny. But I didn't react. I didn't need to. Unlike Jessica, I wasn't walking into this courtroom blind. I was ready, armed with irrefutable facts and a meticulously crafted strategy. My lawyer, Ethan, a man whose outwardly calm and unassuming demeanor belied a razor-sharp legal mind and an almost predatory instinct for legal strategy, sat beside me. He was the quintessential lawyer who could smile pleasantly across the aisle at an opposing counsel while simultaneously, and quite mercilessly, tearing apart their entire case with surgical precision. I'd never been particularly fond of lawyers as a profession, but watching Ethan systematically dismantle Jessica's outrageous and increasingly desperate legal stunts over the past few months had earned my grudging respect and a deep, profound sense of relief that he was unequivocally on my side. Jessica, predictably, had churned through 3 different lawyers since the divorce proceedings began, each one presumably failing to grasp the sheer audacity and inherent flaws of her deceitful strategies. Her current counsel, a fresh-faced newbie straight out of law school, likely desperate to notch his first big win and impress his new firm, looked visibly nervous, his hands clasping and unclasping under the table. I almost felt a pang of genuine pity for him, almost. This wasn't Jessica's first rodeo when it came to manipulating situations to her advantage. She had perfected the struggling woman, Your Honor, please take pity on me act over the years, and disturbingly, some people, easily swayed by a theatrical display of tears, bought into it. Even my own mother, a kind-hearted and overly empathetic woman easily manipulated by emotional pleas, had, much to my frustration, fallen victim to Jessica's charade. Just a week before this crucial hearing, my mom had called, her voice heavy and laced with exhaustion. "Mark, just settle," she had pleaded, her tone bordering on desperation. "You don't want this dragging on forever, do you?" I pinched the bridge of my nose, a familiar, throbbing headache already brewing. "Mom, she's not getting a single cent. That's precisely why we had a prenuptial agreement in the first place." Her voice had dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a deep, dark secret. "But she's pregnant, Mark. Do you really want that on your conscience?" I had almost completely lost my composure then, my voice tight with suppressed anger. "Mom, this isn't my kid." Hesitant, painful pause. "Are you absolutely sure, Mark?" Was I sure? I wanted to shout. She had cheated on me repeatedly, brazenly, and without an ounce of remorse. I had caught her 2 years before our actual separation, with indisputable, photographic evidence. Besides, I had continued, my voice calm and controlled despite the furious internal turmoil. "You know what the absolute worst part is? If I actually thought this was my kid, she wouldn't even need to pull these pathetic stunts. I'd be there. I'd take care of them. No questions asked. That's the fundamental, irreconcilable difference between us, Mom. She schemes and manipulates. I take responsibility and face facts." My mother had gone quiet on the other end, then let out a heavy, resigned sigh. "I just don't want to see this get any uglier, son." It was already ugly, irrevocably so, but I had promised her I'd handle it. And handle it, I would. Which brought us, inevitably, to today. The judge, a stoic, no-nonsense woman with piercing, intelligent eyes and an air of unyielding authority, entered the courtroom, and the hearing officially began. Jessica's lawyer, visibly out of his depth and trembling slightly, immediately launched into a predictable, saccharine sob story. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Jessica Parker, has been left in an impossible, unimaginable situation. She is pregnant, tragically unemployed, and struggling immensely due to the profound emotional and financial strain caused by this protracted, drawn-out divorce." Jessica sniffled precisely on cue. A single, perfectly timed tear discreetly dabbed from the corner of her eye with a pristine tissue. I didn't even blink. I was merely observing, calculating, much like I would analyze a critical anomaly in a multi-million-dollar company's ledger. This was her opening gambit, her desperate play for public and judicial sympathy, but I knew with the cold certainty of facts that the game was rigged irrevocably from the start. Ethan waited patiently, allowing the theatrical performance to unfold, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Then, with a measured grace that commanded attention, he stood up. His presence was calm, meticulously controlled, and radiated an almost unnerving, quiet confidence. He was ready. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear, resonating through the courtroom with an undeniable authority. "While we certainly empathize with Miss Parker's stated situation, we must clarify a few fundamental, legal facts before proceeding with these extraordinary claims." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, then slowly turned to Jessica's flustered lawyer, his gaze unwavering, piercing. "First and foremost, who, precisely, is the biological father of this child?" Just like that, the previously tense but orderly air in the courtroom seemed to thicken, becoming palpably heavier. And Jessica visibly stiffened, her carefully constructed facade momentarily cracking, revealing a flicker of raw panic underneath. Her lawyer froze, his face paling to an alarming shade of white. A weak, desperate attempt at a reply escaping his lips. "My client believes it is the petitioner's, Your Honor." I almost chuckled aloud, a dark, sardonic sound that I thankfully managed to swallow. "Believes." Ethan didn't even flinch. His response was immediate, cutting through the manufactured emotion and legal ambiguity with surgical precision. "She believes? So, Your Honor, there is no definitive, scientifically verified proof of paternity then?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting frantically between her terrified lawyer, the impassive judge, and me, her former husband, now her silent tormentor. The judge's eyes, previously coolly analytical, narrowed perceptibly, a clear sign of her rising impatience. "Miss Parker," she stated, her voice devoid of any warmth, a chillingly precise instrument, "have you undergone a paternity test to substantiate your claim?" Jessica's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Trapped hopelessly in her own intricately woven web of deceit, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I mean, I just assumed." "You assumed?" the judge repeated, her tone dripping with unconcealed disdain and utterly unimpressed. The cold, clinical weight of her words hung heavy in the silent air, a guillotine blade suspended over Jessica's head. "Miss Parker, is there any tangible, verifiable evidence to suggest the petitioner is, in fact, the father?" Jessica's lawyer looked utterly devastated, as if he wished the polished courtroom floor would miraculously open up and swallow him whole. Jessica herself was now visibly pale, her earlier smugness evaporating like morning mist under a harsh desert sun. I leaned back comfortably in my chair, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of my lips. The real show, I knew, had truly just begun. The judge's unimpressed gaze lingered on Jessica, a silent indictment that reverberated through the hushed courtroom. Ethan, ever the master of timing, took a deliberate step forward. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Mark Parker, has strong reason to believe this child is not his." The words, though calmly spoken, struck with the force of a hammer blow. Jessica flinched, her eyes widening, a desperate, animal-like fear momentarily eclipsing her carefully constructed facade. She knew this was coming, but she had underestimated my thoroughness, my relentless pursuit of the truth, a trait honed by years of uncovering hidden financial deceit. "And what precisely are those reasons, Mr. Hayes?" the judge inquired, her voice cutting through the tension. Ethan didn't miss a beat. He turned to the clerk, who promptly displayed a series of enlarged photographs on the courtroom's large monitor. The images, crisp and undeniable, showed Jessica on a sun-drenched beach, just 2 months after our legal separation had been formally filed. In several shots, she was holding hands, laughing, and intimately kissing another man. A tall, muscular man with an expensive watch and an even more expensive tan. "These photographs, Your Honor," Ethan stated, his voice calm and authoritative, "were taken on a vacation Jessica Parker took with a gentleman identified as Mr. Julian Thorne. They clearly demonstrate that Miss Parker had moved on emotionally and physically long before any potential pregnancy with my client could have occurred." Jessica gasped, a sound torn from her throat, her face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. She threw a furious glare at her own lawyer, who seemed to shrink in his seat, clearly oblivious to this damning evidence until now. But Ethan wasn't finished. He then slid a stack of neatly organized medical documents across the table towards the judge. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have subpoenaed Miss Parker's recent medical records. These records unequivocally showed that her first confirmed positive pregnancy test was obtained 4 months after she and my client had last been together. As a forensic accountant, Mr. Parker meticulously tracks dates and financial records. He maintains an immutable timeline of his life." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by Jessica's shallow, ragged breaths. Her face crumpled, not in genuine sorrow, but in pure, unadulterated fury at being exposed. Her lawyer stared at her, a dawning realization of her profound deception etched onto his face. He had been played for a fool, a pawnee in her calculated scheme. The judge, after a long, weary sigh, shook her head slowly. Her gaze, when it finally settled on Jessica, was cold, devoid of any sympathy, filled instead with quiet condemnation. "Miss Parker," she stated, her voice sharp, unforgiving, "this court does not take kindly to deception, especially not deception intended to manipulate legal proceedings and defraud another party. Given the overwhelming and irrefutable evidence presented, there is absolutely no basis for financial support. The prenuptial agreement stands firm and unambiguous. You will not be receiving alimony or any additional compensation whatsoever from Mr. Parker. This hearing, Miss Parker, is over." The finality of the judge's words, sharp and decisive, echoed through the courtroom. Jessica gasped again, this time as if she had been physically struck, her air punched out of her lungs. "But, Your Honor," she blurted out, her voice a desperate, high-pitched squeal. But it was too late. The judge simply held up a hand, a gesture of absolute finality. "Done," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jessica sat there, utterly frozen, the judge's words still hanging in the air like a death knell. I watched her in real time, her brain visibly scrambling, desperately trying to find a way out of the inescapable trap she had so meticulously set for herself. This wasn't how she had envisioned today going. In her carefully curated version of events, she was supposed to cry, to look pitiful and vulnerable, and then to walk out with a fat, monthly check, a lifetime of financial security guaranteed. Instead, she had been publicly exposed, her lies meticulously dissected, and laid bare for all to see. Her lawyer wasn't even looking at her anymore. He was staring intently at the floor, probably re-evaluating every life decision that had led him to take on this spectacularly ill-fated case. Meanwhile, Jessica was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white, as if she could somehow hold on to the last, rapidly dissolving shreds of her elaborate scheme. Then, the inevitable tantrum started. It was Jessica's last, desperate, pathetic attempt at salvaging something from the wreckage. "But Your Honor," she blurted out again, her voice shrill and laced with indignant outrage. "This isn't fair. I'm about to have a baby, and he just gets to walk away from everything?" The judge exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples with a weary hand. She was done with Jessica's theatrics. "Miss Parker," she said firmly, her voice carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "this court does not make financial judgments based on emotional appeals or fabricated sympathy. Your pregnancy has absolutely no legal bearing on this divorce unless paternity is definitively established, which, based on the irrefutable evidence provided, it emphatically has not been." The judge held up a hand again, cutting off Jessica's next frantic protest. "Enough, Miss Parker, enough." Jessica snapped. She turned abruptly in her chair, whipping her head towards me, her eyes blazing with a raw, vengeful fury. "You're really going to do this to me? To your own child?" There it was, her final, desperate gamble, flung out like a venomous dart. Even after being publicly humiliated, exposed, and utterly defeated, she was still trying to plant a seed of doubt, a lingering question in the minds of anyone listening. The courtroom went silent, the air crackling with unspoken tension. Then I smiled. It was a slow, amused, and utterly merciless smile. A predator's smile. "You really want to go on record with that accusation, Jessica?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, almost conversational, yet imbued with an icy certainty. "You want to go on record accusing me of being the father? Because we can get a court-ordered paternity test done right now, in this very building." Her face twitched violently, a spasm of pure, unadulterated fear and helplessness. She had nothing. She knew she had nothing. And in that frozen, awful moment, so did everyone else in the room. The judge didn't even bother responding this time. She simply turned to the clerk, her gaze unwavering. "Adjourned." Jessica had lost everything, but it wasn't over yet. The hearing was concluded, but I wasn't done watching her carefully constructed world fall apart. I walked out of the courtroom with Ethan beside me, the hushed murmurs of the gallery fading behind us. My mother trailed a few steps behind, her face a mixture of relief and lingering concern. I half expected Jessica to slink out quietly, defeated and ashamed, but I should have known better. She was never one to go gracefully. She stormed out after me, her heels clacking a furious rhythm on the polished marble floor, her face an alarming shade of crimson, hands visibly trembling with impotent rage. "You're a monster," she hissed, her voice raw and venomous, echoing through the wide hallway. "You let me sit there, humiliated. You reveled in it." I stopped, turning slowly to face her, my gaze sweeping over her, taking in her disheveled state, the raw fury distorting her features. My voice was calm, almost conversational, a stark contrast to her explosive anger. "I'm sorry, Jessica," I said, a faint, sardonic smile touching my lips. "Which part precisely humiliated you? The part where you brazenly attempted to scam the court with a fabricated paternity claim, or the part where you finally realized I was 3 steps ahead of your pathetic scheme?" Her jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in her cheek. "You set me up," she spat, venom in every syllable. "No, sweetheart," I replied, my smile widening, devoid of any warmth. "You set yourself up. I simply allowed you to walk straight into the trap you so meticulously constructed." She looked as if she wanted to lunge at me, to claw at my face. But then, in a final, desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control, she tried one last card. She turned to my mother, her voice suddenly laced with a pathetic plea for sympathy, tears welling in her eyes. "Are you seriously okay with this, Aunt Margaret? With what he did to me? To his own child?" My mother hesitated for a moment, her eyes softening slightly before hardening with resolve. She crossed her arms, a gesture of unwavering support for me. "I'm not okay with what you did to him, Jessica," my mother said, her voice firm and unwavering, surprising even me with its strength. "You had us all fooled once, manipulating everyone with your tears and lies. But never again." Jessica's lip quivered, and for a second, I actually thought she might genuinely cry, not out of remorse, but out of sheer, frustrated defeat. Then, the real explosion came, raw and unfiltered. "I hope you rot, Mark," she spat, stepping forward as if she truly wanted to physically attack me. I hope you, Miss Parker. The voice, stern, official, and cutting through her tirade like a surgical blade, came from directly behind her. Jessica froze, her furious rant abruptly cut short. Two court officers, their faces impassive, had quietly stepped into the hallway. "Come with us, please," one of them instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jessica's head snapped around, confusion and a fresh wave of panic washing over her face. "What? Why?" "The judge has recommended an inquiry into potential perjury and fraud," the other officer stated, his gaze fixed firmly on her. "You'll need to answer some questions back in the courtroom." Her eyes went wide with pure terror. "Wait, no, that's not." But it was too late. They were already gently, but firmly, leading her back towards the courtroom doors, her protests growing fainter with each step. I let out a slow, deliberate breath, feeling a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lift from my shoulders. Ethan patted my shoulder, a genuine, satisfied smirk on his face. "Well, that was gratifying," he murmured. I smirked back. "Yeah, it was." Jessica was dragged back into the courtroom, her desperate pleas echoing down the hall. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The moment those court officers took her away, she ceased to be my problem, a lingering shadow cast from a past life that was now definitively, irrevocably closed. But I still made sure to follow up, a final, professional courtesy to the truth. Turns out, the judge wasn't just pissed. She was making an example out of Jessica, faking financial distress, bad, trying to manipulate the court, worse, lying under oath about paternity to secure a payout. That was outright perjury and a clear attempt at fraud. Her fraudulent claims meant she was now under official investigation. The court didn't just dismiss her plea for alimony. They flagged her entire case for potential financial fraud, a deeper probe into her past financial dealings and any other manipulative schemes she might have orchestrated. She had, indeed, dug her own grave, and now the legal system was burying her in it. Over the next few months, I heard bits and pieces of her spectacular downfall through Ethan. The judge hit her with substantial fines for wasting the court's precious time and resources. Her eager young lawyer, thoroughly embarrassed and unwilling to risk his fledgling career, dropped her case immediately. Her desperate attempt to file for government aid was swiftly denied. Turns out, they also require proof of paternity, a detail she conveniently overlooked. And the cherry on top of her bitter, self-made sundae? Her new boyfriend, Mr. Julian Thorne, dumped her. Apparently, after Ethan pulled out those vacation photos in court, he started doing the math. He realized he wasn't the only one she had been involved with. And suddenly, he wasn't so sure he was the father either. I can only imagine that agonizing, humiliating conversation. A few months after the trial, I received a text from an unknown number. It was short, resentful, and utterly predictable. "Jessica, I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a second, a fleeting ghost of the past. Then, I typed back, a simple, honest truth. "I am. Thanks for asking." And then, I blocked the number, permanently. I didn't need to hear from her ever again. She had spent years trying to manipulate, control, and milk me for everything I had, for every last drop of my patience and my resources. But now, she was truly alone, facing the barren, empty reality of her own making, stripped of her illusions and her ill-gotten gains. And for the first time in a very long time, I was free. Free to choose my own path. Free from the toxic entanglement. Free to build a life based on genuine connection and honest truth. I'd even started looking into adopting a Saint Bernard, a loyal, steadfast companion for my newly liberated life, a symbol of unwavering devotion to contrast with the deceit I had finally escaped. The world, once shrouded in the suffocating fog of her manipulations, now gleamed with the clear, sharp light of possibility.